The church was filled with the soft hum of organ music, the air thick with the scent of fresh flowers. The bride stood at the altar, her white gown shimmering under the golden light streaming through the stained glass windows. The groom, dressed in a sharp black suit, smiled nervously as the priest began his sermon. It was a picture-perfect moment, the kind people dream about for years. But then, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church creaked open. All heads turned. A small figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright sunlight outside. It was a boy, no older than 8, his face streaked with tears. In his arms, he cradled a baby, wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket. The boy's clothes were dirty, his shoes worn, and his eyes wide with fear and desperation. The organ music stopped abruptly. The priest paused mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. The bride and groom exchanged confused glances. The guests whispered among themselves, their voices rising in a wave of murmurs. The boy took a hesitant step forward, then another. His small frame trembled as he walked down the aisle, his sobs echoing in the silent church. The baby in his arms stirred, letting out a soft cry. The boy stopped in front of the altar, his tear-filled eyes locking with the priest's. "Please," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. "You have to help us." The priest knelt down, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "What's wrong, son? Where are your parents?" The boy shook his head, his tears falling faster. "They're gone. They're gone, and now they're coming for us. You have to stop the wedding. You have to stop it now." The priest's face turned pale. He stood up slowly, his hands shaking as he turned to the bride and groom. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "This wedding cannot continue." The church erupted in gasps and whispers. The bride's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. The groom stepped forward, his face a mix of anger and confusion. "What are you talking about? Who is this kid?" But the boy didn't answer. He just stood there, clutching the baby tightly, his small body shaking with fear. The priest looked at the boy, then at the stunned congregation, and repeated, "This wedding cannot continue." The scene ended with the boy whispering something to the priest, something that made the old man's face go even paler. The guests leaned forward, trying to catch the words, but they were too quiet. The only sound was the baby's soft cries and the boy's ragged breathing. And just like that, the perfect wedding was shattered, replaced by a mystery that no one could explain. Who was this boy? Where did he come from? And why was he so desperate to stop the wedding? The audience was left on the edge of their seats, their minds racing with questions. What would happen next? What was the boy hiding? And most importantly, what did it all mean? The church was in chaos. Guests whispered loudly, some standing up to get a better look at the boy and the baby. The bride, her face pale and hands trembling, turned to the groom. "What's going on? Who is he?" she asked, her voice shaking. The groom shook his head, his jaw tight. "I don't know. I've never seen him before." The priest, still visibly shaken, gently guided the boy and the baby to a small room at the back of the church. The bride and groom followed, their wedding forgotten for the moment. The room was quiet, with only the sound of the baby's soft cries breaking the silence. The priest knelt in front of the boy, his voice calm but urgent. "Son, tell us what's happening. Who are you? Where are your parents?" The boy sniffled, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "My name is, it doesn't matter. My parents, they're gone. They disappeared a week ago. They were scientists. They told me to take care of my sister if anything ever happened to them." He looked down at the baby in his arms, his voice breaking. "This is my sister. She's all I have left." The bride, her curiosity overcoming her shock, stepped closer. "Scientists? What kind of scientists? What were they working on?" The boy hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if he was afraid someone might be listening. They were working on something big. They called it the device. They said it could change everything. But they also said it was dangerous. They told me to hide it if they ever disappeared. The groom crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. A device? What kind of device? And why would it have anything to do with our wedding? The boy shook his head. I don't know. But they told me to come here if something went wrong. They said the wedding was important. They said the people who took them would come here too. The room fell silent. The bride exchanged a worried glance with the priest. People took them? Who? Why? The boy's lower lip trembled. I don't know their names. They wore black suits. They came to our house one night and took my parents away. I hid with my sister in the basement. I heard them talking, they said something about stopping the wedding. That's why I came here. To warn you. The groom's face darkened. This doesn't make any sense. Why would anyone care about our wedding? And what does this device have to do with it? The boy looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. I don't know everything. But I know the device is important. My parents said it could save us, or destroy us. I have it hidden. If you help me, I can show you. The bride, her journalist instincts kicking in, knelt beside the boy. Where is it? Where's the device? The boy hesitated again, then whispered, It's in an old lab outside of town. My parents used to work there. But it's dangerous. The men in black suits might be watching it. The priest stood up, his face grave. We need to see this device. If what the boy is saying is true, we could be in serious danger. The groom shook his head. This is insane. We're talking about some kind of conspiracy now. Over a wedding? The bride stood up, her voice firm. We can't ignore this. If there's even a chance that what he's saying is true, we need to find out. If nothing else, we owe it to him and his sister. The boy looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, he whispered. The priest nodded. We'll go to the lab. But we need to be careful. If these men are as dangerous as the boy says, we can't take any chances. The group left the church through a back door, avoiding the curious eyes of the guests. The boy led them to an old, beat-up car parked behind the building. The bride and groom exchanged uneasy glances but followed the priest and the boy inside. As they drove through the quiet streets, the boy stared out the window, his small hands clutching the baby tightly. The bride tried to comfort him. It's going to be okay. We'll figure this out. The boy didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, his mind clearly elsewhere. The tension in the car was palpable, each person lost in their own thoughts. After a long drive, they reached the outskirts of town. The boy pointed to an old, abandoned building hidden among the trees. That's it, he said quietly. The lab. The group got out of the car, the air thick with unease. The building was dark and crumbling, its windows broken and its walls covered in graffiti. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. The boy led them inside, his small flashlight cutting through the darkness. The lab was a mess, with overturned tables and broken equipment scattered everywhere. But in the center of the room, on a dusty workbench, sat a small, glowing orb. The boy walked up to it, his hands trembling. This is it, he said. The device. The group stared at it, their faces a mix of awe and fear. The bride stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. What does it do? The boy shook his head. I don't know exactly. But my parents said it was powerful. They said it could change everything. Before anyone could respond, a noise from outside made them all freeze. The sound of car engines and heavy footsteps echoed through the building. The boy's eyes widened in fear. They're here. The sound of car doors slamming outside sent a chill through the group. The boy's face turned pale, and he clutched the baby tighter. They're here, he whispered again, his voice trembling. The men in black suits. The bride grabbed the boy's arm, her voice urgent but calm. We need to hide. Now. The priest quickly scanned the room, his eyes landing on a large, overturned table near the back of the lab. Over there, he said, pointing. Behind that table. Stay quiet. The group hurried to the table, crouching behind it just as the heavy footsteps grew louder. The lab's front door creaked open, and the beam of a flashlight swept across the room. The boy held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. Two men entered the lab, both dressed in black suits and sunglasses, despite the darkness. They moved with precision, their eyes scanning the room. One of them spoke, his voice cold and detached. They're here. I can feel it. The other man nodded, his hand resting on a weapon holstered at his side. Find the device. And the boy. He's the key. The group behind the table exchanged terrified glances. The bride mouthed to the others, what do we do, but no one had an answer. The boy's eyes were fixed on the glowing orb still sitting on the workbench in the center of the room. He knew they couldn't let the men take it. The men in black suits began searching the lab, overturning tables and kicking aside debris. They were getting closer. The groom, his face slick with sweat, whispered, we can't just sit here. We need to do something. The priest nodded, his voice barely audible. Distract them. I'll grab the device. Before anyone could argue, the groom stood up, his hands raised. Hey! Over here. The men in black suits turned sharply, their flashlights blinding him. One of them raised his weapon. Don't move, he barked. The priest seized the opportunity. He darted out from behind the table, his robes flapping as he ran toward the workbench. The men shouted, but the priest was faster. He grabbed the glowing orb and turned to the group. Run! Chaos erupted. The bride grabbed the boy's hand, pulling him toward the back door. The baby began to cry, her wails echoing through the lab. The men in black suits shouted, their footsteps pounding as they gave chase. The group burst out of the lab and into the woods, the darkness swallowing them whole. The priest led the way, the glowing orb clutched tightly in his hands. The boy stumbled as he ran, his small legs struggling to keep up. The bride scooped him up, the baby still cradled in his arms. This way, the priest called, veering off the path and into the dense trees. The group followed, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the men in black suits were closing in, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The groom, lagging behind, turned to see one of the men raising his weapon. Look out, he shouted, diving to the ground as a shot rang out. The bullet whizzed past, embedding itself in a tree. The bride screamed, but the priest grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. Keep going. Don't stop. They ran until their lungs burned, the sounds of their pursuers growing fainter. Finally, the priest stopped near a small, hidden clearing. Here, he said, panting. We'll hide here. The group crouched behind a cluster of bushes, their hearts racing. The boy peered through the leaves, his eyes wide with fear. Are they gone? He whispered. The priest shook his head. I don't know. But we can't stay here long. The bride turned to the boy, her voice gentle but urgent. You said your parents told you about this device. What did they say it does? The boy hesitated, his eyes flicking to the glowing orb in the priest's hands. They said it's a time machine. Or something like that. They said it could change the past or the future. But they also said it was dangerous. If the wrong people got it, the groom, still catching his breath, interrupted. A time machine? Are you serious? That's impossible. The priest held up the orb, its soft glow illuminating their faces. Is it? Look at this. It's like nothing I've ever seen. If what the boy is saying is true, this could be the most important discovery in human history. The bride nodded, her mind racing. And if those men get their hands on it, who knows what they'll do with it? We can't let that happen. The boy looked at them, his small face filled with determination. We have to use it. My parents said it could save us. But we have to be careful. If we make a mistake, his voice trailed off, but the weight of his words hung in the air. The group fell silent, the enormity of the situation sinking in. They were no longer just running for their lives, they were holding the key to something far greater. The sound of footsteps in the distance snapped them back to reality. The men in black suits were still searching, their voices growing louder. The priest stood up, his face resolute. We need to move. We can't let them find us. The group nodded, their fear replaced by a steely determination. They had the device. They had the boy. And they had a mission. But as they slipped deeper into the woods, the boy couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The men in black suits were relentless, and the device's power was still a mystery. What would happen if they used it? And more importantly, what would happen if they didn't? The group moved quickly through the dense woods, the glow of the device casting eerie shadows on the trees. The boy clung to the bride, his small hands gripping her tightly. The baby, now quiet, seemed to sense the danger and stayed still in his arms. The priest led the way, his robes snagging on branches as he pushed forward. The groom brought up the rear, constantly glancing over his shoulder for any sign of the men in black suits. The sound of distant shouts and footsteps kept them on edge. The men were still out there, searching, and they were getting closer. The bride whispered to the priest, "Where are we going? We can't keep running forever." The priest paused, his breath visible in the cold night air. "There's an old farmhouse not far from here. It's abandoned. We can hide there for a while and figure out what to do next." The groom shook his head, his voice tense. "And what if they find us there? We're sitting ducks if we stop moving." The boy looked up, his voice small but firm. "We have to use the device. It's the only way." The group fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. The priest glanced down at the glowing orb in his hands. "He's right. But we need to be careful. We don't know what this thing is capable of." The bride nodded, her face pale but determined. "Let's get to the farmhouse first. We can't risk using it out here in the open." The group pressed on, their footsteps crunching on the dry leaves. The woods seemed endless, the darkness pressing in on all sides. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made them freeze, their hearts pounding. But they kept moving, driven by fear and the faint hope that the device could save them. Finally, the farmhouse came into view. It was old and crumbling, its windows broken and its roof sagging. But it was shelter, and for now, that was enough. The priest led them inside, the door creaking loudly as it swung open. The air inside was musty, and the floorboards groaned under their weight. The groom quickly closed the door behind them, his eyes scanning the room. "We need to barricade this. If they find us, we're trapped." The priest set the device on a dusty table, its glow illuminating the room. The boy sat down on the floor, still holding the baby, his eyes fixed on the orb. "We have to use it," he said again, his voice trembling. "Before it's too late." The bride knelt beside him, her voice gentle. "We will. But we need to understand what it does first. Can you tell us more about it? What did your parents say?" The boy hesitated, his small hands clutching the baby tighter. "They said it's it's not just a time machine. It's a way to change things. To fix things. But it's dangerous. If you use it wrong, it could make everything worse. The priest frowned, his eyes narrowing. How do we use it? Is there a way to control it? The boy shook his head. I don't know. They never showed me. They just said to keep it safe. The groom let out a frustrated sigh. Great. So we've got this thing, but we have no idea how it works. What are we supposed to do, just press a button and hope for the best? The bride shot him a sharp look. We don't have a choice. Those men are going to find us eventually. We have to try something. The priest nodded, his face grim. She's right. We can't just sit here and wait. But we need to be careful. If this device is as powerful as the boy says, we could end up causing more harm than good. The group fell silent, the weight of their decision hanging in the air. The boy looked at the device, his small face filled with a mix of fear and determination. We have to try, he whispered. For my parents. For my sister. The bride reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. We will. But we need to do this together. The priest picked up the device, its glow casting strange shadows on the walls. All right. Let's see what this thing can do. But before they could do anything, the sound of car engines outside made them freeze. The groom rushed to the window, peering through the broken glass. They're here, he said, his voice tight with fear. They've found us. The men in black suits were outside, their flashlights sweeping the area. They were closing in, their voices cold and methodical as they coordinated their search. The boy's eyes widened in panic. We have to use it now. The priest nodded, his hands trembling as he held the device. All right. Everyone, stay close. The group huddled together, their breaths coming in shallow gasps. The priest closed his eyes, his lips moving in a silent prayer. Then, with a deep breath, he pressed a small button on the side of the device. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was silent, the tension unbearable. Then, the device began to hum, its glow intensifying until it filled the room with blinding light. The group shielded their eyes, their hearts pounding as the hum grew louder and louder. And then, with a sudden flash, everything went dark. When the light faded, the group found themselves standing in the same farmhouse, but something was different. The air felt heavier, the shadows deeper. The device in the priest's hands had stopped glowing, its surface now dull and lifeless. The groom was the first to speak, his voice shaky. What just happened? Did it work? The priest looked around, his face pale. I don't know. It doesn't feel like anything changed. The boy, still clutching the baby, looked up at them with wide eyes. It did something. I can feel it. Before anyone could respond, the sound of footsteps outside made them freeze. The men in black suits were still there, their voices cold and calculating as they searched the area. But something was off. Their movements seemed slower, more deliberate, as if they were unsure of where to look. The bride whispered, "Why haven't they found us yet? It's like they don't know we're here." The priest frowned, his eyes narrowing. Maybe the device did something. Maybe it changed something. The boy nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. It's like my parents said. It can change things. But we have to be careful. If we use it too much, it could make everything worse. The groom ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. This is insane. We're talking about time travel now. This can't be real. The bride turned to him, her voice firm. You saw what happened. That device did something. We can't just ignore it. The priest held up the device, his expression thoughtful. The boy said his parents were scientists. What if they were working on something bigger than we can imagine? What if this device is the key to stopping whatever those men are after? The boy looked at the priest, his small face filled with a mix of fear and hope. We have to find out. For my parents. For my sister. The group fell silent, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. The men in black suits were still outside, their voices growing louder as they closed in. The bride took a deep breath, her mind racing. We need a plan. We can't just sit here and wait for them to find us. The groom nodded, his jaw tight. All right. Let's think. What do we know? Those men are after the device, and they're connected to the wedding somehow. Why would they care about a wedding? The bride's eyes widened as a thought struck her. What if the wedding was part of their plan? What if they needed it to happen for some reason? The priest's face darkened. That would explain why the boy was told to stop it. If the wedding was a key part of whatever they're planning, stopping it could disrupt everything. The boy looked up at them, his voice trembling. My parents said the wedding was important. They said the people who took them would come here. They knew something was going to happen. The groom shook his head, his frustration boiling over. This doesn't make any sense. Why would a wedding be so important? What could they possibly gain from it? The bride's eyes narrowed as she pieced things together. What if it's not about the wedding itself? What if it's about the people involved? You and me. The priest. What if we're part of their plan? The room fell silent as the group processed her words. The priest's face turned pale. If that's true, then we're in more danger than we realized. They're not just after the device, they're after us. The boy's grip on the baby tightened. We have to stop them. We have to use the device again. The priest looked down at the orb in his hands, his expression conflicted. But we don't know how it works. If we use it wrong, we could make things worse. The bride stepped forward, her voice firm. We don't have a choice. Those men are going to find us eventually. We have to try something. The groom let out a frustrated sigh. All right. But if we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. We can't just press buttons and hope for the best. The boy looked up at them, his small face filled with determination. We have to trust the device. My parents said it could save us. We have to believe them. The group exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of their decision hanging in the air. The sound of footsteps outside grew louder, the men in black suits closing in. The priest took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he held the device. All right. Let's do this. But before he could activate the device again, the door to the farmhouse burst open. The men in black suits stood in the doorway, their weapons raised. One of them stepped forward, his voice cold and emotionless. Hand over the device. Now. The group froze, their hearts pounding. The boy clutched the baby tighter, his eyes wide with fear. The bride stepped in front of him, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. You're not taking it. The man's lips curled into a thin smile. You don't have a choice. The priest tightened his grip on the device, his voice firm. You'll have to go through us first. The man raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger. As you wish. But before he could fire, the boy shouted, No. And with that, the device in the priest's hands began to glow again, its light filling the room. The men in black suits hesitated, their eyes widening in surprise. The priest looked down at the device, his voice filled with awe. It's working. The light grew brighter and brighter, until it consumed everything. The last thing the group saw was the men in black suits being swallowed by the light, their faces frozen in shock. And then, everything went dark. When the light faded, the group found themselves standing in a completely different place. The farmhouse was gone, replaced by a vast, futuristic city. Towering skyscrapers stretched into the sky, their surfaces gleaming with neon lights. The air was filled with the hum of machinery and the distant sound of voices. But something was wrong. The city felt cold, lifeless, as if it was missing something vital. The boy looked around, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. "Where are we?" The priest held the device tightly, his face pale. "I don't know. But this isn't our time." The bride stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Is this the future?" The groom shook his head, his eyes scanning the city. "It can't be. This doesn't look right. It's like something's missing." The boy clutched the baby tighter, his small face filled with a mix of awe and fear. "This is what my parents were trying to stop. They said the device could show us the future. They said it was dangerous." The priest nodded, his voice heavy with realization. They were right. This is what happens if we don't stop those men. The group fell silent, the weight of their situation sinking in. The city around them was a dystopian nightmare, its streets empty and its buildings cold and sterile. The only signs of life were the occasional drone flying overhead, its cameras scanning the area. The bride turned to the boy, her voice gentle but urgent. "What else did your parents say? Did they tell you how to fix this?" The boy hesitated, his eyes flicking to the device in the priest's hands. "They said the device could change things. But they also said it was dangerous. If we use it wrong, it could make everything worse." The groom let out a frustrated sigh. "Great. So we're stuck in some kind of future hell, and we have no idea how to get back." The priest shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "No. The device brought us here for a reason. We need to find out what went wrong. If we can figure that out, maybe we can fix it." The group began to walk through the city, their footsteps echoing in the empty streets. The air was thick with tension, the silence oppressive. The boy looked around, his small face filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We have to find out what happened. For my parents. For my sister." The bride nodded, her voice firm. "We will. But we need to be careful. If this is the future, we don't know what we're dealing with." As they walked, they began to notice strange details. The buildings were covered in strange symbols, their surfaces cold and unyielding. The streets were lined with abandoned vehicles, their windows shattered and their interiors empty. The only signs of life were the occasional drone, its cameras scanning the area with cold, mechanical precision. Finally, they reached a large, imposing building in the center of the city. Its surface was covered in the same strange symbols, its doors sealed shut. The priest looked up at it, his face pale. "This is it. This is where we need to go." The groom frowned, his voice tense. "How do you know?" The priest held up the device, its surface glowing faintly. "The device is leading us here. It's guiding us." The group exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. The boy looked up at the building, his small face filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We have to go in. We have to find out what's inside." The bride nodded, her voice firm. "All right. But we need to be careful. We don't know what we're walking into." The group approached the building, the doors sliding open as they got closer. The inside was dark and cold, the air thick with the smell of metal and oil. The walls were lined with strange machines, their surfaces covered in blinking lights and strange symbols. As they walked deeper into the building, they began to hear voices. Cold, mechanical voices, speaking in a language they couldn't understand. The boy clutched the baby tighter, his small hands trembling. "What is this place?" The priest shook his head, his voice heavy with dread. "I don't know. But I think we're about to find out." Finally, they reached a large, circular room in the center of the building. The walls were covered in screens, each one displaying strange images and symbols. In the center of the room was a large, glowing orb, its surface pulsating with energy. The group froze, their eyes wide with shock. The orb was identical to the device in the priest's hands, but larger, more powerful. The boy looked up at it, his voice trembling. That's the device. But it's different. The priest nodded, his face pale. This is what they were trying to stop. This is what happens if we don't. The bride stepped forward, her voice trembling. What do we do? How do we stop it? Before anyone could answer, the screens on the walls flickered to life. A cold, mechanical voice filled the room, its tone emotionless and detached. You are not supposed to be here. The group turned, their hearts pounding. The voice continued, its words sending chills down their spines. This is the future. This is what happens when humanity loses its way. This is what happens when the device falls into the wrong hands. The boy looked up at the screens, his small face filled with fear. What are you? The voice responded, its tone cold and unfeeling. I am the result of your actions. I am the future you created. The priest stepped forward, his voice firm. We didn't create this. We're trying to stop it. The voice paused, as if considering his words. Then it spoke again, its tone unchanged. You cannot stop what has already happened. But you can change it. If you have the courage. The group exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. The boy looked up at the priest, his small face filled with determination. We have to try. For my parents. For my sister. The priest nodded, his expression resolute. All right. Let's do this. But before they could act, the screens flickered again, and the voice spoke one last time. Be warned. The path ahead is dangerous. And not all of you will survive. The room fell silent, the weight of the voice's words hanging in the air. The group exchanged uneasy glances, their hearts pounding. The boy clutched the baby tighter, his small hands trembling. We have to try. We have to. The priest nodded, his voice firm. We will. But we need to be careful. If this is the future, we don't know what we're dealing with. The group stepped forward, their eyes fixed on the glowing orb in the center of the room. The device in the priest's hands began to glow again, its light filling the room. The boy looked up at it, his small face filled with a mix of fear and determination. We have to stop this. For everyone. And with that, the light consumed everything. When the light faded, the group found themselves back in the abandoned farmhouse. The futuristic city was gone, replaced by the familiar, crumbling walls and dusty floorboards. The device in the priest's hands had stopped glowing, its surface dull and lifeless once more. The groom was the first to speak, his voice shaky. What just happened? Did we go back? The priest looked around, his face pale. I think so. But, it feels different. Like something's changed. The boy, still clutching the baby, looked up at them with wide eyes. The device brought us back. But it's not over. We have to stop them. The bride nodded, her voice firm. We saw what happens if we don't. We can't let that future come true. The groom ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. But how? We don't even know who they are or what they're planning. The priest held up the device, his expression thoughtful. The boy said his parents were trying to stop something. Something big. We need to find out what that is. The boy looked at the priest, his small face filled with determination. We have to go to the lab. My parents' lab. That's where they were working. That's where we'll find answers. The bride nodded, her voice steady. All right. Let's go. But we need to be careful. Those men in black suits are still out there. The group left the farmhouse, the device safely tucked away in the priest's robes. The woods were quiet, the only sound the crunch of leaves under their feet. The boy led the way, his small flashlight cutting through the darkness. The baby in his arms was quiet, her eyes wide and curious. As they walked, the groom turned to the priest, his voice low. "Do you really think we can stop this? Whatever this is?" The priest shook his head, his expression grim. "I don't know. But we have to try. If what we saw in the future is real, we don't have a choice." The bride stepped closer, her voice firm. "We'll figure it out. Together. We have to." The boy looked up at them, his small face filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We have to stop them. For my parents. For my sister." The group fell silent, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The woods seemed endless, the darkness pressing in on all sides. But they kept moving, driven by fear and the faint hope that they could change the future. Finally, they reached the lab. It was just as they had left it, the door hanging open and the inside a mess of overturned tables and broken equipment. The boy led them inside, his small flashlight cutting through the darkness. The device on the workbench was gone, but the boy didn't seem surprised. "They took it," he said quietly. "The men in black suits. They took the device." The priest frowned, his face pale. "Then we're too late." The boy shook his head, his small face filled with determination. "No. There's another one. My parents made a backup. It's hidden." The group exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. The bride stepped forward, her voice gentle but urgent. "Where is it?" The boy hesitated, his eyes flicking to the priest. It's in the basement. But it's dangerous. My parents said we should only use it if we have no other choice." The priest nodded, his voice firm. "We don't have a choice. We have to stop them." The boy led them to a hidden door in the floor, its surface covered in dust and debris. The group worked together to clear it away, their hands trembling with fear and anticipation. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the basement. The boy looked up at them, his small face filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We have to be careful. The backup device is powerful. But it's also dangerous." The priest nodded, his expression resolute. "We'll be careful. But we have to do this." The group descended into the basement, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and metal. The boy's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a small, hidden room in the corner. Inside was a large, glowing orb, its surface pulsating with energy. The boy stepped forward, his small hands trembling as he reached for the orb. "This is it. The backup device." The priest held out his hand, his voice firm. "Let me take it. We need to be careful." The boy hesitated, then handed the orb to the priest. The group gathered around, their eyes fixed on the glowing device. The bride stepped closer, her voice trembling. "What do we do now?" The priest looked down at the device, his expression thoughtful. "We need to figure out how to use it. But we have to be careful. If we make a mistake, we could make things worse." The boy nodded, his small face filled with determination. "We have to stop them. For my parents. For my sister." The group fell silent, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The device in the priest's hands began to glow again, its light filling the room. The boy looked up at it, his small face filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We have to stop this. For everyone." And with that, the light consumed everything. When the light faded, the group found themselves standing in a vast, underground facility. The walls were made of cold, unyielding metal, and the air was thick with the hum of machinery. The device in the priest's hands was glowing brightly, its light casting strange shadows on the walls. The boy looked around, his eyes wide with fear and wonder. Where are we? The priest's face was pale, his voice trembling. This is where they're keeping it. The core. The heart of whatever they're planning. The bride stepped forward, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. We need to find it. We need to stop them. The groom nodded, his jaw tight. But how? We don't even know what we're looking for. The boy clutched the baby tighter, his small face filled with determination. We have to trust the device. It brought us here for a reason. The group began to move through the facility, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The air was thick with tension, the silence oppressive. The device in the priest's hands was their only guide, its glow growing brighter as they moved deeper into the facility. Finally, they reached a large, circular room in the center of the facility. The walls were covered in screens, each one displaying strange images and symbols. In the center of the room was a large, glowing orb, its surface pulsating with energy. The group froze, their eyes wide with shock. The orb was identical to the device in the priest's hands, but larger, more powerful. The boy looked up at it, his voice trembling. That's the core. That's what they're using to control everything. The priest nodded, his face pale. This is it. This is what we have to destroy. The bride stepped forward, her voice trembling. But how? It's huge. And it's protected. Before anyone could answer, the screens on the walls flickered to life. A cold, mechanical voice filled the room, its tone emotionless and detached. You are not supposed to be here. The group turned, their hearts pounding. The voice continued, its words sending chills down their spines. This is the core. This is the heart of the future. You cannot stop what has already been set in motion. The boy looked up at the screens, his small face filled with fear. What are you? The voice responded, its tone cold and unfeeling. I am the result of your actions. I am the future you created. The priest stepped forward, his voice firm. We didn't create this. We're trying to stop it. The voice paused, as if considering his words. Then it spoke again, its tone unchanged. You cannot stop what has already happened. But you can change it. If you have the courage. The group exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. The boy looked up at the priest, his small face filled with determination. We have to try. For my parents. For my sister. The priest nodded, his expression resolute. All right. Let's do this. But before they could act, the screens flickered again, and the voice spoke one last time. Be warned. The path ahead is dangerous. And not all of you will survive. The room fell silent, the weight of the voice's words hanging in the air. The group exchanged uneasy glances, their hearts pounding. The boy clutched the baby tighter, his small hands trembling. We have to try. We have to. The priest nodded, his voice firm. We will. But we need to be careful. If this is the core, we don't know what we're dealing with. The group stepped forward, their eyes fixed on the glowing orb in the center of the room. The device in the priest's hands began to glow again, its light filling the room. The boy looked up at it, his small face filled with a mix of fear and determination. We have to stop this. For everyone. And with that, the light consumed everything. When the light faded, the group found themselves back in the church where it had all begun. The air was still, the scent of fresh flowers lingering in the air. The boy stood at the altar, the baby in his arms, his small face filled with a mix of relief and sorrow. The bride and groom stood beside him, their hands clasped tightly. The priest stood a few steps away, his face pale but resolute. The device in the priest's hands was gone, its light extinguished. The church was silent, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind outside. The boy looked up at the priest, his voice trembling. Did we do it?" The priest nodded, his voice heavy with emotion. "Yes. We did. The future has been changed. The core has been destroyed." The bride stepped forward, her voice gentle but filled with awe. "But, how? What happened?" The priest looked down at the boy, his expression thoughtful. "The device, it was a key. A key to change the future. And you, my boy, were the one who unlocked it." The boy's eyes filled with tears, his small hands clutching the baby tighter. "For my parents. For my sister." The groom shook his head, his voice filled with wonder. "I still don't understand. How did we get back here? And what happens now?" The priest smiled, his voice calm and steady. "The device brought us back to the beginning. To the moment when it all started. But this time, we have a chance to make things right." The boy looked up at the priest, his small face filled with determination. "We have to tell them. We have to warn them." The priest nodded, his expression resolute. "Yes. We will. But first, we need to make sure that the boy and his sister are safe." The bride stepped forward, her voice firm. "They will be. We'll make sure of it." The group fell silent, the weight of their journey pressing down on them. The boy looked up at them, his small face filled with a mix of fear and hope. "Thank you. For everything." The priest knelt down, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "No, my boy. Thank you. You were the one who showed us the way. You were the one who saved us all." The boy's eyes filled with tears, his small hands clutching the baby tighter. "For my parents. For my sister." The groom shook his head, his voice filled with wonder. "I still don't understand. How did we get back here? And what happens now?" The priest smiled, his voice calm and steady. "The device brought us back to the beginning. To the moment when it all started. But this time, we have a chance to make things right." The boy looked up at the priest, his small face filled with determination. "We have to tell them. We have to warn them." The priest nodded, his expression resolute. "Yes. We will. But first, we need to make sure that the boy and his sister are safe." The bride stepped forward, her voice firm. "They will be. We'll make sure of it." The group fell silent, the weight of their journey pressing down on them. The boy looked up at them, his small face filled with a mix of fear and hope. "Thank you. For everything." The priest knelt down, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "No, my boy. Thank you. You were the one who showed us the way. You were the one who saved us all." The boy's eyes filled with tears, his small hands trembling as he clutched the baby. "For my parents. For my sister." The group exchanged uneasy glances, their hearts pounding. The bride stepped forward, her voice gentle but filled with determination. "We'll make sure they're safe. We'll make sure they're taken care of." The priest nodded, his expression resolute. "Yes. We will. But first, we need to make sure that the future stays changed. That the core stays destroyed." The group fell silent, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The boy looked up at them, his small face filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We have to stop this. For everyone." And with that, the light consumed everything.